Good day to all you migrants, the diaspora, Africans everywhere, including South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, US, even Zimbabwe. This is Lawrence here, and I'm continuing with my podcasting career, which I'm finding quite fascinating. And because I live in Australia, I'd like to introduce a scenario regarding process engineers. And this is a scenario where an engineer moves from a country like Zimbabwe to South Africa and ultimately to Australia or New Zealand. When they do that, there are associated pay rises that occur with that scenario. However, there are also associated costs, higher costs, ongoing costs, cost of living. Are these compatible? In other words, as a person's pay rises during the migration process, do they lead to higher costs, which basically swallows up the net disposable income? Is it something that people ponder about before making the move? Do they say, well, if I go into Australia, I'll get a higher salary, but my costs will be too high? And I just like to pursue that avenue and see where it goes. Obviously, in Australia, the gap between an average person and an engineer is much smaller. It's a tighter gap wage band. However, in Zimbabwe, there's a much larger discrepancy. An average person or a laborer or semi-skilled earns very little compared to an engineer. Now, does that mean, therefore, that a person coming from Zimbabwe would experience a much higher salary and commensurate with that more disposable income, or will the costs in Australia swallow that? Now, from my own background as a mining process engineer who's worked in both scenarios, I see there's a salary versus cost living paradox. Typically, if I look at a country like Zimbabwe, the engineering income is quite low, the cost of living is low, and the ability to save is often limited in hard currency. You move to South Africa and the income becomes more moderate, as does the cost of living and the ability to save. However, when you move to Australia, obviously the income is high, cost of living then is commensurately high, but the ability to save is also usually higher. And the same with New Zealand, which is a high to moderate income and a moderate ability to save. It's important to point out that costs rise, but income often rises faster. For instance, a Zimbabwean engineer may earn the equivalent of $2,000 to $4,000 a month, US. An Australian engineer may earn between 120 and 180,000 Australian dollars. But obviously housing, food, insurance and utilities are much higher in Australia. But the Australian engineer can often still save more money in absolute terms than the Zimbabwean engineer. That's something I was able to do having migrated. So financially, the migration improves your long-term wealth accumulation. The hidden factor is the purchasing power. The real question is not salary. It's simply, what can my salary buy? In Australia, pretty much buys everything, like reliable electricity, water, modern hospitals, mortgage finance, financial loaning for a vehicle, stable banking, pension schemes after retiring, consumer protection, and in pension schemes, I would add the superannuation that a company will fund to your retirement, and obviously predictable taxation. You know how much you're going to pay. These things have value, but they're not often captured in a salary comparison. If you compare dollar for dollar, you don't include those things. A Zimbabwean engineer may earn enough to hire domestic help, live in a large house, and enjoy a high social status, but may also face power interruptions, currency instability, limited access to capital, difficulty obtaining specialist healthcare, sometimes having to go outside the country like South Africa or India, or in some cases Turkey, and the economic uncertainty that comes with the disrupted political scenario. These are hidden costs, and they're also not compared when you look at a salary. The social and standing and the status and things become interesting when you look at these, because a senior engineer can often occupies an elite position. He may employ staff like housemaid and garden attendant. He may own a large property which needs looking after. Hence, he pays people to do that. He'll be highly respected because of the pay differential and the status that goes with that. And you will have obviously significant social influence. In Australia, an engineer is well paid, but just considered middle, upper middle class. No one differentiates or assumes you're a member of an elite position because there are a lot more engineers and they're all well paid. So the social distance between the engineer teacher and the engineer nurse, engineer and public servant is much smaller in Australia. Some migrants consider this as losing the status, which you don't get. And some have found, much to their surprise on arriving in Australia, that what they earn, how much they earn, whether they drive a fancy car, is completely irrelevant. So, in other words, Australia lives more as an equal opportunity society. Now, emotional wealth versus financial wealth. A Zimbabwean engineer has emotionally wealthy but financially constrained, and Australian engineer is financially wealthy but emotionally constrained. That's true to some extent, but it's not always true. Many migrants report missing, that is, migrants into Australia, missing the extended family, familiar culture. Everyone speaks Shona or Ndebele or Zulu or Xhosa. Language, which is important, community networks, old friends, old schoolmates, a sense of belonging, going to the pub with your friends that you know, meeting them in social circles. At the same time, they gain, once they come to Australia, they gain security, predictability, better infrastructure, roads, highways, housing, electricity, all those things, and better opportunities for the children. Most children tend to end up at university and acquire degrees and become successful themselves. Now, what many migrants discover after 10 to 20 years is, and this is a common observation among African professionals, in the first decade, the focus is on earnings, career growth, moving step by step into responsible positions, home ownership, buy your first house, you've got time to pay it, and children's education, finding the best schools for the children, and strategizing where you live in relation to those educational opportunities. And in the second decade, you start asking the question, where's home? Who are my people? What have I lost? Do I want to retire here or back in Africa? So the financial gains become less important, and then identity and belonging becomes more important. The engineering specific reality is that engineers are unusual because their skills are globally transferable. So a process engineer in Zimbabwe, South Africa, Australia is often essentially doing the same mass balances, metallurgical, process control, water treatment, optimization, commissioning, design work. What changes in the ecosystem around the engineer? So if you're an engineer, you've got the quality of the infrastructure, you've got regulatory certainty, no one changes the game plan as you go along. The safety culture built into operating procedures and designs, technology investment, companies investing to uplift the work environment, how you manage your operation, and access to capital. You can go and get a loan from a bank and buy whatever you want to buy. You want a boat, you want a jet ski, it's doable. Many engineers find the technical work more satisfying in Australia because projects are funded and the systems are maintained. So you walk into an operation, everything works. You don't have to do anything except your job. Others miss the creativity required in Zimbabwe, where engineers often have to solve problems with limited resources. Pumps are not pumping. You don't have the spares. What do? The control system is out of whack. You don't have the software application updates. What do? What can you resort to doing? A more balanced conclusion is that there is a possibility that an engineer in Zimbabwe may enjoy greater social status, stronger family connections, and richer sense of belonging. But he faces a greater economic uncertainty. In the meantime, an Australian engineer may enjoy greater financial security, institutional stability, future opportunities of which are abound by the job market shows that, but can experience social isolation and weaker community ties. So be prepared for a bit of loneliness and withdrawal. Neither is emotionally bankrupt nor financially bankrupt. Just each country rewards different forms of wealth. The difficult question for many migrants is not where can I earn the most, but which form of wealth matters to me most at this stage in my life. For professionals from Zimbabwe who migrate to Australia, the answer changes over time, as I indicated, between the 10 and 20-year scenarios. They obviously the changing values become greater as they grow older, and the challenge is finding a balance between the two. And I take it from that to understand how basically the rewards mismatch between Australia and New Zealand and Zimbabwe, on the other hand, can be quite complex, and depending on your period in your life. I hope that answers a few questions for those who would like to or are considering emigrating, and I hope it answers a few questions for those already emigrated who are at some stage in their development in the diaspora. And for those of you who are not going anywhere, I hope that was entertaining enough for you to understand the complexities of living in the diaspora. I thank you for your time. Have a lovely day, and we will meet again soon. Thank you.